Tokyogamelife, a Tokyo-based video game podcast focusing on Nintendo and gaming culture in Japan's capital. Your host Mono here to bring you a slice of gaming life from Tokyo. Today, author Matt Alt joins the podcast as we talk about one of the biggest geek hotspots in all of Tokyo, Nakano Broadway. We chat about how this symbol of modernity became a holy land for Japanese retro culture, our most amazing shopping discoveries, and what's the most likely fate for the massive shopping complex. In the game section, I share some final thoughts on Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door on Switch. Plus, in the news, I dig into the Direct and many other game announcements, plus fun game events coming up soon in Tokyo. Let's get started with Nakano Broadway and Matt Alt. Today's feature is on Nakano Broadway, one of the more unique hotspots for gaming and geek culture in Tokyo. Joining me to chat all about it is a special guest. So guest, please introduce yourself.
I'm Matt Alt. I am the author of Pure Invention, How Japan Made the Modern World. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me. Let's lay some groundwork for those who maybe don't know. What is Nakano Broadway?
Well, Nakano Broadway is a shopping complex. It's located on the west side of Tokyo, a few stops away from Shinjuku in Nakano. And it's been there for quite a long time. It incorporates a big residential building as well. And it anchors this entire shopping arcade that extends from Nakano Station out to the building which Nakano Broadway is in. And it's just a huge kind of shopping complex, like a lot of shopping streets and things all around it. And it's a fun place to go.
You've been in Japan for quite a while. Do you remember your first ever trip to Nakano Broadway?
Wow, yeah. I mean, I've been living here for 21 years now, but I think the first time I went out there must have been in the 90s. I actually spent, the thing that drew me to it is that there's a shop chain called Mandarake. And Mandarake has outlets all over Tokyo and many other cities in Japan. And it's a store that specializes in reselling used pop culture ephemera, like all sorts of stuff, comic books, games, toys, you name it, posters. And I was mainly familiar with them from their Shibuya outlet, which was really kind of thriving in the 90s and the early 2000s. And I don't know how it was that I realized they also had one in Nakano Broadway. And it turns out that the Broadway one was first. This was something I didn't realize at the time I was going there.
Yeah, my first trip wasn't actually that long ago, relatively, especially compared to you. Maybe 2021, I made my first trip down there.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah.
And I've been back a few times since. Obviously, for me, I mostly hit up the gaming hotspots, but there are dozens and dozens of other shops inside the complex. Let's touch on the history of the place a little bit. It opened up in 1966 in Nakano, which you said is right outside of Shinjuku. And ironically, it still does sell a lot of things from that time period, or at least close to it. But at its opening, it must have been a very modern structure, right?
Yeah, so actually, turning the clock back a little earlier, Nakano was leveled during World War II because it was the site of a large military training facility that basically trained spies and like infiltrators and things like that. It's the Nakano Training Academy. And so it was targeted by the Allies. That whole area was wiped out. And in the years after World War II, a black market sprung up there. And this was pretty common in urban areas in Japan. There wasn't a lot of food. There wasn't a lot of money. People would barter things. People would pilfer things from Japanese bases and resell it. All sorts of shenanigans, so to speak, going on as a survival tactic. This wasn't something that people were doing for fun or to make money or anything like that. Although I'm sure there were individuals profiteering off of it. And a lot of the places that we see as fun spots in Tokyo now got their start that way. Akihabara is another one. And Akihabara kind of specialized more in technological things like radio parts, vacuum tubes. And that's why that section of town turned into the electronics district. Nakano was the site of another one of these things and another one of these black markets. And over the years, it kind of gentrified into a shopping arcade. Shotengai, as they're known in Japan, which are very common to find in neighborhoods all over, like suburban areas all over Japan. Japanese people typically didn't go to like supermarkets and things like that. I'm talking in the post-war era. They'd go to their local greengrocer, the meat guy, the butcher, whatever the thing you wanted was. There was some neighbor of yours would be running a shop on the kind of main street in your neighborhood. And Nakano's is a particularly kind of large one, maybe because it's so close to downtown Tokyo. Like you said, in 1966, some real estate developer got the hot idea of building a giant, gleaming, modern for the era shopping residential mixed complex there called Nakano Broadway, and it opened in 1966. It was touted as literally the greatest building in Asia. It was, I believe, the tallest building in Asia for a little while before bigger buildings were built elsewhere. So it was kind of like a remarkable achievement. And early on in the 60s, real movers and shakers lived there. Sawada Kenji, the rock star, idol, and actor, lived there. There were politicians living there. It was really a big deal when it opened in the 1960s.
How did it become synonymous with the idea of retro?
The Nakano Broadway that we all know actually dates back to 1980. And that is, do the math, that's a good 14 years after the place opened. And by that point, Nakano Broadway was already kind of on the wane, so to speak. It was no longer the hip, trendy place to live. It was no longer gleaming and new. It was already a decade and a half old. And 1980 is when Masuzo Furukawa, who is the founder of Mandarake, decided to open a used bookstore there. And it was tiny. Like, he opened this tiny used bookstore in this fading shopping mall that nobody really cared about, and just started running his business there. And that is the seed from which the Mandarake empire started and grew.
Yeah, let's talk about Mandarake. There's a few Mandarake stores all over Tokyo, like you said, but Nakano Broadway is really its home base. How would you differentiate Mandarake from, say, Book Off?
Oh, yeah. Well, Book Off, to me, when that opened, I thought it was kind of a Mandarake clone in a lot of ways. But the big difference between a Book Off and Mandarake is that Book Off specializes largely in mainstream literature, nonfiction, periodicals, stuff like that. It's a used bookstore, like an average. It's a chain. It's well run. It's well stocked. Depending on which one you go, there's like hundreds and hundreds of Book Off outlets in Japanese cities. But it's like the kind of first place you would go if you wanted a bestseller to buy it used or a fairly well-known book. Mandarake is 100% manga and subculture. Like, you would not go there for the Japanese translation of Harry Potter, although I'm sure they have it, or something like that. It's where you go when you want like a copy of Shonen Jump from 1975, or when you want some weird occult manual that was published whenever. It's not the place you go for quote unquote normal literature. It's the place you go for abnormal literature and manga and things like that. So it has this kind of counterculture, insofar as that concept even exists anymore, subculture, pop culture focus that places like Book Off do not.
Is there any type of specific fandom or types of merch you think Nakano is the place to go over Akihabara?
My feeling is that Akihabara's pop cultural shops tend to specialize more in modern things, up-to-date, cutting-edge anime, like cutting-edge manga, the popular stuff. It's become a real tourist spot recently. In the last, certainly post-COVID, it was already trending that way pre-COVID, but post-COVID, it's just exploded. You're more likely to encounter a non-Japanese person on the street in Akihabara on a weekend than a Japanese one, I think. Mandarake, or Nakano Broadway in specific, tends to focus on older stuff. The audience there tends to be older. It's people who are into series that aren't necessarily cutting edge. Like, if you want a Transformer, for instance, like that you remember from your childhood, you'd go to Mandarake or you'd go to Nakano Broadway, one of these stores, more than I think you would aim for Akihabara, which isn't to say you can't find stuff like that in Akihabara. Mandarake actually has a whole tower there called Mandarake Complex, and another shop that specializes in soft vinyl called Cuckoo, Coocoo, in Akihabara. So there are places to find cool stuff and retro stuff in Akihabara too, but Broadway really lives it and embodies it. And it kind of, it's crusty, it's musty.
Yes.
and that's why you go there.
We've talked about the history. Let's actually go inside Nakano Broadway. Like you said before, it definitely doesn't have the kind of gleam and allure it might have had in the 1960s, but does have a lot of character, I would say. And do you have any personal favorite stores you often frequent or you find interesting in Nakano Broadway?
I'm a toy collector. My interest in Japan was sparked by toys as a kid, toy robots, transforming robots, combining robots, robots that don't do anything, whatever. I love that kind of stuff. And so I think every person kind of follows their fetish, so to speak. Like somebody who's into movie posters would go this way. Somebody who's into manga would go this way. Somebody who's into finals, whatever, video games. Everybody has their own track. But for me, I think the thing I like best about Nakano Broadway is it really feels like a time capsule. It hasn't been renovated since the 1960s. It feels like a 1960s building. It's laid out in a very 1960s, 1970s way. You just don't build places like this anymore. Like the layout is kind of maze-like. There's not a lot of windows. It's intersected by these staircases. The geometries of it are very, I think, retro. Like the building itself is an antique. So just simply walking around in there, there's all of these smells. There's the kind of decaying cardboard and musty paper. And there are restaurants in there that have been run for decades and specializing in all sorts of pretty pinpoint unique foods. There's like a tempura place. There's like a vegetarian place. There's a place specializing in like a mugi toro, which is this kind of ground up, kind of a potato-like root that makes this sticky paste that you put on top of rice and things like that. There's all of these kind of really unique shops in there. And so it's an atmosphere. You know what I mean? It's a vibe. It's a feeling.
Yeah, it definitely does feel like you're kind of going back in time in a good way, I would say. Is there a shop you came across in Nakano Broadway that really surprised you, either in its layout or what kind of goods it carries?
There's so many surprises in there. I think the one that really shocked, I'm not really shocked by much in Nakano Broadway anymore, but I remember encountering one shop that dealt exclusively in like cereal premiums and like the little candy toys that were packaged with chocolates and things like that back in the 60s and 70s, which was and is still kind of like a big genre of toy in Japan. And like the prices on some of this stuff were just mind boggling, like thousands of dollars for these little tiny pieces of plastic that are basically, I mean, they're better than Cracker Jack trinkets because this is Japan. And even those toys, the toy makers put a surprising amount of effort and detail into, but just the prices on some of them were just mind blowing. I was like, wow. And they're gone when you come back the next time. So somebody is out there and somebody bought them. There's somebody out there who specializes in nothing but vintage 1970s Japanese candy toy premiums. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there like that.
Yeah, for me, like I mentioned before, I mostly hit up the game stores, and the biggest one in Nakano Broadway is probably Mandarake Galaxy.
Right.
It's fairly big with aisles of games, and it really doesn't shy away from, especially deep cuts. Like, for example, they have probably the most WonderSwan games I've seen any store ever carry. And they even carry like 3DO games. They have PCFX and MSX games and so forth. They also have the Famicom games and whatnot, but they also have a lot of great, how would I describe this? Kind of displays from old game stores.
Yes, the ephemera. They have like game adjacent stuff too. I remember one of my big regrets is that it was early COVID, I think, and there was nobody in Nakano. And they had that store, I believe it was Galaxy, out in their window. Is that the one? I actually don't know what the names of a lot of these places are. I just know them by sight. Is that the one that has like the Game and Watches and like all the vintage games on display in the cases outside?
Yeah, they have a huge, kind of like a window, I guess, or a glass case right outside.
Well, they had like 5 or 6 issues of Game Freak by Satoshi Tajiri. And at the time, they were like, oh my God, 10,000 yen each? That's crazy. But now, like, those, I really wish I could read them. And it's called Game Freak because Satoshi Tajiri was one. And this is where the game company's name comes from. And he was penning these doujinshis, which are full of, like, strategies for beating Galaga and stuff like that. Or, like, Dragon Quest. Like, it was the doujinshi, like, self-published zine that he was putting out in the 80s before he became kind of like a full-on game developer. And now I'm just like, man, I should have just thrown down and gotten those things because they're incredibly rare and it's just a window into, the soul of this guy.
Yeah, definitely. I think for that price, I probably would have bid as well if I saw that. And they had the Nintendo Entertainment sign, which was like a big sign that a lot of the stores, like for example, like Big Camera and so forth, in the Famicom days, there would be like a Nintendo section. And of course, they have a big gold Mario statue that I badly want. That thing is also there. Another game store I recommend is called Lashinbang Audio Visual. Its stock is not as big as Mandarake Galaxy, but what they do have is probably at a better price, and they do have a lot of fun stuff. Has there been any, I guess you mentioned it, I guess maybe besides the Game Freak magazines, is there another game-related find you've come across in Nakano Broadway that was really memorable?
I remember when it was shortly after my book had come out. And so I was very, very familiar with this piece of equipment. It was like a Nintendo TV Game 15, which is the kind of Pong clone that Nintendo put out, a color TV game, I think it's called. And it was designed by Masayuki Uemura, who headed up, I believe it was R&D 2 at Nintendo. And it was like one of their early attempts at the Nintendo we know today as like this factory of dreams. But in the late 70s and really prior to about Donkey Kong, it was just a copycat. All they did was copy other people's game designs. And they made all of these games they're really probably not too proud of now, like Space Invaders clones and like Pong clones and stuff. But its history had a like one of those color TV game consoles in there. And for whatever reason, I didn't pick it up. Probably should have. You need a special. You can't hook that up to like a LCD flat panel. You have to invest in a CRT to really run that kind of thing. And I was like, man, I think I should just leave that for somebody who can really appreciate it. And it was gone. So it did go off the family room in the sky, I guess, where somebody plugged it into their TV. But yeah.
Akiba definitely has a larger stock, but Nakano has a lot of game merch from the 80s and 90s and rare stuff that you probably wouldn't find elsewhere. Another Mandarake score is called Microcon, they have a lot of Keshi toys, which I featured before on the podcast. And
Micro is one of my favorites there. It's not just Keshi, it's all sorts of cheap toys. I like Micro a lot because I do like that style of toy. But when you're a little kid, most of the time, the toys you would get from your parents or the ones that you could scrape the money to get together by yourself aren't the huge deluxe like play sets. It's like little cheap things that you get like at a penny candy store in Japan or out of like a gumball machine kind of situation, or like just the cheapest kind of thing that was in a toy line. And Micro specializes in all of that stuff. So the Transformer, the non-transforming Transformers erasers, or like Gundam figures that were, sold as little model kits with candy, or 1,000,001 different variations of things that were sold at vending machines. All sorts of stuff like that. I really like it because to me, that stuff speaks to childhood even more than the really, really expensive stuff that everybody's kind of idolizes. The big deluxe toys, the jumbo machineders, the Chogokin diecasts, all of that stuff that commands huge sums. Is great, but the Micro is just full of that little cheap stuff.
Yeah, and the Microcon also has a lot of 90s era Pokemon toys, which I'm a big fan of. And I went there with my wife once, and she mentioned that, they have these Dragon Quest battle pencils. Right. I'm not sure exactly the rules, but you can battle with pencils somehow. I think they have stats like written on them, or I'm not sure. Right. But she mentioned she saw that from her childhood, and she was like, wow, I can't believe they have it here.
When I was writing Pure Invention, I kind of set out to get one of every sort of gadget and product that I was writing about in there. And when I knew I needed Tamagotchis, the original Tamagotchis, I went straight to Micro and bought them there. And they still worked. I actually raised a Tamagotchi for the first time in 20 years in the course of writing that book. And it's all thanks to Micro.
What would you say is the rarest item you've ever come across in Nakano Broadway?
Well, that's actually really easy because it happened just a couple of years ago. There is a toy series that is known as the Jumbo Machineder series in Japanese. They're like 2-foot tall polyethylene plastic super robots. They were sold in the 1970s and 80s in America as Shogun Warriors. And they're really cool. They're like these big plastic kind of indestructible toys. And Bandai, under its subsidiary Popey, started putting them out in the early 70s and continued throughout the 80s. And there's just dozens of these things. And like other companies put out their rival versions, and they're all really cool. It's actually what I collect, like, or used to before they got so freaking expensive. But there is a series of villains, enemies that Popey produced, and they were made in very small numbers because they thought kids would prefer the heroes. And they're made out of soft vinyl. They're like giant soft vinyl toys. And the rarest one of those is an enemy from a TV series called Mazinger Z. It was called Transor Z in the American English speaking market. But it's a bad guy called Garada K7 who has this skull for a head and these giant like death sigh like horns coming out of the sides of his head. And the toy shoots this ball out of his chest. It's literally the rarest Japanese character toy. There's so few of them and they go for astounding sums. And it was a year or so ago, I walked in and they actually had one on display in a showcase. And I was like, oh my God. I'd only even confirmed. I was the one who actually confirmed the existence of this toy years and years back, or found the first photographs of it through a Japanese collector friend of mine. But I'd only seen them on a few very rare occasions. And so to come across one in Mandarake, in Nakano Broadway, in broad daylight in this showcase was just absolutely astounding. It was not for sale. It was up for auction. And this actually leads into another aspect, probably, and forgive me if I'm getting ahead of things. Like, Mandarake now puts all of its choices stuff up for auction. And so a lot of the showcases in there are full of stuff that you can't buy. I find that to be kind of a bummer. Like, not that this Garada K7 ended up going for, I believe it was $250,000. It was just an insane amount of money at auction. And like, this is not the kind of thing that I would like be able to walk in and be like, hey, I'm going to buy this. But yeah, that was certainly the rarest thing that I saw there.
Wow. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah, no, it was amazing. I was like, I got like the hair standing up on the back of my neck when I saw it. I was like, oh my God, it's here.
Let's talk about what is maybe the most high-profile shop in Nakano Broadway, Tonari no Jingaro, or Zingaro maybe in the English pronunciation. Can you touch on when it entered Nakano Broadway and its impact on the area?
Well, Zingaro is one of the brand names that the pop artist Takashi Murakami, who kind of rose to prominence in the aughts with his commodification of otaku culture into pop art for foreign consumers, he sort of set up base in Nakano about 10 or 15 years back. I actually am not a huge follower of Takashi Murakami's work, so I'm not exactly sure when that happened or why he did it, but his art collective now has a bunch of galleries in there. They also run a pretty cool coffee shop in there, which is modeled on an old 1970s Invader room, which is what arcades were called in Japan at the turn of the 1980s, because they were mainly only Space Invaders cabinets. And those cocktail sit-down ones, you go and order a drink and play Space Invaders. So they have that coffee shop is really amazing. It's actually right next to Micro, which we were talking about. Great atmosphere there. But yeah, like Murakami is doing his own thing in there. It's kind of adjacent to Mandarake. I don't know if they're collaborating. I don't know what's going on. But yeah, so there's that kind of pop art thing going on too.
Yeah, it's an incredibly popular store. Sometimes when I go up there, there's a huge queue like right outside the door. And I've even seen security guards there, which I've really never seen at any other store. So it's definitely like a lot of not super expensive items, but things a lot of people really want, especially overseas customers. Do you think there's any sort of advantage to being in Nakano Broadway?
Sure. I mean, it's like there's a lot of tourists there.
Yeah. Do you think that maybe that might lead to maybe more artists like moving in? Will in 10 years Nakano Broadway be some sort of like art haven, you would think?
It's a tough call because nobody really knows what's going to happen to Nakano. I think that Murakami targeted Nakano Broadway because he knew that it fit his image. He's a pop cultural guy, and whether you like that or you don't like that, he's a guy who kind of brings Japanese pop culture and high fashion together. So there's a lot of people out there, often the same ones who are lining up outside of Supreme stores and things like that, or like Harajuku street fashion stores, who come for whatever latest limited edition collaboration he's doing. But I actually don't think there's a lot of overlap between the people who are into Murakami's stuff and who are into the actual vintage ephemera that Nakano Broadway sells. In fact, I kind of see it a little bit exploitative, a little bit appropriative. Is that the word? To me, the whole point of Broadway is the hunt. You go in there looking for things that might only have personal value to you. And that personal journey is what Nakano Broadway is about. So lining up to get the latest high fashion art collab things that you can flip on Mercury or Yahoo Auctions or eBay, to me, is just not in keeping with the spirit of that place. But it's not like they're hurting anyone. It's just not my thing.
What do you think is the future of Nakano Broadway? Is it just going to be a gradual decline, or can you see it being revitalized in some way? Or is it always going to maintain some level of stability because it focuses on such specific nerd cultures?
The future of Nakano Broadway, a pile of rubble I think it's rapidly kind of deteriorating. It's the reason that it has never been renovated is really simple. Nobody knows who owns a lot of it. So many of those retail spaces have changed hands so many times that it's almost impossible to manage it as a collective. That's why it has this kind of pirate black market feel to it, because it is a sort of pirate black market, not in an illegal sense. People do sign leases and stuff like that. But there's no overarching management of the place. It's why they haven't been able to update the HVAC system. It's why they haven't been able to tile the floors or repaint the walls. There's no sense of collective ownership of the place. It's like a bunch of people who've set up shop in there. And so the place is slowly deteriorating. At a certain point, they're going to have to tear it down when it gets damaged, or I don't even know whether it's been updated for modern earthquake standards or anything like that. There's no plans to do this anytime soon, but it's not tenable over the long term. To be brutally honest, I think if they knocked it down and tried to rebuild it, it would lose everything. It would be an expensive place. The whole great thing about Nakano traditionally is that it wasn't that expensive to rent a spot in there. Rents were cheap, so you could be some solo weirdo, which I mean in the best possible sense, and open some shop that catered to people just like you. It was a place to kind of find your tribe. And so the way that it's becoming a tourist anchor is, I actually have to be honest, I had some reservations about even coming on here and doing this, because I don't think Nakano Broadway needs more people coming to it right now, more gawkers, more tourists. It's a great place. It's a place that was kind of a secret for a long time, and now it's not. And it is sort of losing something for that. You see a lot of people there who are trying to get something so they can flip it, as opposed to going there because they want to get something because they love it. And already the Mandarake itself is kind of transitioning away from the storefront sales to using the storefronts to advertise things or auctioning, which is, I get it. It makes them more money, but it also really makes it more difficult to find kind of gems in the rough or weird things there, because they know what everything's worth. Everybody knows what everything's worth, and it just all goes up on auction to the highest bidder. So, I mean, that's life. That's just how it goes. Things have changed, but that's another aspect of Nakano's future that I think is going to be accelerating, which is that all the good stuff is going to go out online. It's not going to go out through the stores.
All right. Final question. What tips would you give to somebody who is visiting Nakano Broadway for the first time?
Bring money, lots of it. Cash. I mean, what advice would I give? Just go in there and luxuriate in it. Just enjoy the atmosphere. Fly your freak flag. Find your tribe. Who knows? Maybe you're going to find some repressed childhood memory of an old toy or video game you haven't seen. It's like a Rorschach test to see what kind of things you like. But yeah, I would also say be respectful to the people there. Remember that this isn't like a theme park. It's actually a place where people are running businesses. And the margins are very thin. If you go into a place and spend a lot of time there, consider buying something to support the owner. And yeah, just be respectful. Remember, you're a visitor there.
Awesome. Well, Matt, it was great to chat with you about Nakano Broadway. I would definitely recommend it if you are a retro nerd, and Nakano in general is actually quite nice. There's a place called Maguro Mart where you can basically eat an entire giant tuna. So do that and then go buy some old toys. All right, Matt, where can people find you?
You can find me at blog.pureinventionbook.com. That's my newsletter, the Pure Invention newsletter. And you can find my book. It's on Amazon. It's everywhere. It's Pure Invention, How Japan Made the Modern World. It's got a website, pureinventionbook.com. Look for it. Look for me everywhere. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. I'm everywhere you are online.
Great. And the links to everything will be in the podcast description, so listeners, check it out. Once again, Matt Ault, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
I did it. I rolled credits on Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door. Is that a paper pun? Like roll of paper? Let's say it is. I talked about the game a few episodes ago when I was only a few chapters in, but now I got all the crystal stars, beat all the baddies, may or may not have gotten all the star pieces. I'll leave that up for you to decide. So I wanted to share some final thoughts on this remake of the much discussed 2004 Intelligent Systems RPG. Hey, I didn't mention this last episode, but did you know that the director of this game is not Kawade, who directed the first two games, but instead Masahiko Nagaya, who directed The Origami King? Did you know that? Well, now you do. First thing off the bat, I think it's very safe to say that this is the definitive version of Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door. Not sure what one would prefer from the first game, except for maybe the visual style. Like I mentioned before, the remake has much more dynamic and realistic lighting, which makes it seem like a diorama, as opposed to a flat picture book like the first game. I can see some people digging how the GameCube version looked over the remake, but outside of maybe that, the remake is better in every way. Yet it doesn't fix every single issue I had with that original game. My overall opinion of the game hasn't really changed compared to when I first played it. It's a very good RPG with an awesome battle system, instantly memorable setting, clever puzzles, and well-hidden secrets that reward curiosity, but it has pacing problems, an absurd amount of backtracking, and no, it's not as good as Paper Mario 64. But then again, no game is. Let me jump into the positives. The character building and battle system makes the game. You want to get into battle so you can test out new strategies and see how much more powerful you got. I remember I played Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and I got some ability that let me do 47,000 arrow damage. That means nothing to me. But now Mario's hammer can do 10 HP of damage? That is legitimately game-changing. Bigger numbers aren't always better. In fact, I would argue the opposite. Obviously, most of your level ups should be into BP, aka badge points. One level up gives you 3 more badge points, which has the potential to straight up change the game. You're always excited to level up and see what you can equip. Badges that give you new combat abilities, or even passive stuff, like attacks missing when you have 5 HP, these things let you feel extremely powerful in the battles. It's always great when you just get a little bit more powerful and now you can KO an enemy in 1 hit compared to 2. The game gives you more badges than you'll need, but there are battles where you need to change them up quite a bit, so it's always good to have a surplus. Favorite badge? Quake Hammer and Fire Drive are really awesome attacks that seem pretty powerful. Also, any badge that lets you do 1 HP more damage is just exciting to equip. Again, 1 HP means a lot in this game. Things like Damage Dodge or Last Stand also make you feel invincible. The game does a great job in balancing out interesting offensive and defensive badges. The badge system is pretty much what separates Paper Mario from the other Mario RPGs and just RPGs in general. You don't equip weapons or armor, and most of the power upgrades are story-driven. Customizing Mario in this way is very unique. I mean, when you play Odyssey, you don't have a Mario build, right? Even in Super Mario RPG, which came out a few months ago, it treats Mario like every other RPG character in terms of leveling up and equipping items. There's no variety there. But in Paper Mario, my Mario and your Mario could be quite different. Outside of its battle system, the other big reason why people love this game is the diverse setting and the very big and interesting cast of characters. I talked a lot about Rogueport a few episodes ago, and yeah, it's certainly one of the more iconic locales in all of Mario. The fact that each chapter also takes you to so many unorthodox locations keeps the game really fresh. Yeah, the first chapter is basically your typical small town with a castle, but then you get to go to a wrestling arena, then a spooky town with a haunted house, a train journey complete with pit stops, and you end up in a fancy city, and then you can even go to the moon, which is obviously a must for any great game. All your partners are very fun to talk to, and they're all very different in battle as well. Plus, they all come equipped with amazing abilities once you level them up. Best partner? I mean, it's easily Yoshi Kid. I love how he calls you Gonzalez for literally the entire game. The great thing about Thousand Year Door in general is that you really don't know who you will meet and where you will end up, and each chapter's structure is very different from each other, so it doesn't feel like a retread. But speaking of retread, you will retread, literally, your steps in the game. This game is really well known for its backtracking, and that you will have to go from point A, then B, then A again, then B again, then C, then back to A, and then finally B, then C. Intelligent Systems has tried to mitigate this with the addition of new warp pipes, which certainly do help, but the core issue can't be erased. Think about how many times you got to go back all the way to Hooktail Castle. Yes, I know some of these are side quest related, but you probably want to do those, right? Or Twilight Town, where you got to go back and forth from the haunted house several times. Or the train chapter, where you need to revisit so many rooms again and again. The game is also very economical in terms of screens, with each chapter only being a handful of them, but you're going to see them more than once. Pretty much every chapter has some sort of noticeable backtracking, and I can't lie, it does weigh on you. I think implementing some sort of more modern fast travel system would go a long way. Let me just open the menu and go straight to Twilight Town. What is that really going to hurt? It's not like the game needs to be padded out at all. It's about a 30-hour game, so cutting a few of those hours, thanks to reduced backtracking, would be very helpful. Maybe this would affect Mario's growth, since likely everyone is about the same level when they beat the game, because it's not like you can really grind all that much, and skipping a lot of battles thanks to a fast travel system might leave you underleveled, but even then, I don't think it's that much of a concern. It's a bittersweet game for many since this was the final Paper Mario RPG. Did it have flaws? Yeah, but it also has many strong elements that we never really saw expanded upon in future games. Origami King comes closest in terms of delivering JRPG-esque exploration, giving us open areas filled with secrets and fun things to do and see. If Origami King had an expanded version of Paper Mario RPG's battle system, I think many people would put it ahead of The Thousand Year Door. But again, that's a game with more muted character designs, so Thousand Year Door still feels very singular in a lot of ways in how it portrays the world of Mario. When Super Paper Mario came out, I wasn't disappointed that it wasn't an RPG, because it did feel like a spin-off and it had an interesting core concept. I thought, oh well, we will get another Mario RPG in the future, so don't worry about this one. But then Sticker Star came out and was hounded by so many that I skipped it, despite the first maybe being my favorite game ever. And then I skipped Color Splash for largely the same reason. It's very clear that Nintendo or Intelligent Systems was a little lost with what they should do with the series. Since the RPG elements of the game are so distinct from other RPGs, I think that maybe they did feel like they needed to dial it down even more, since Paper Mario in general streamlines a lot of elements from the JRPG genre as a whole. But those first two Paper Mario games are addition through subtracting. While Mario doesn't have a stat sheet or equipment, what it has instead makes the series feel completely new and interesting. Also, should I do some sort of ultimate Mario RPG ranking, despite not playing all of them? I've never touched Partners in Time, or Dream Team, or Paper Jam, or should I just do some sort of ultimate Paper Mario ranking, or combine them? Let's just rank all the Mario RPGs I've played and the non-RPG Paper Mario games that I've played, so no Sticker Star or Color Splash. So this is very confusing and a very incomplete ranking, but here we go. 1. Obviously, Paper Mario 64, the perfect video game. 2. Honestly, I'm kind of leaning towards Bowser's Inside Story. It brought the Mario and Luigi concept to its apex, and had such a great concept where you switched off between the Bros and Bowser, and the story was very clever in how both storylines interacted with each other. 3, I'll give it to Super Mario RPG, which is basically a game that took all the fun parts of an RPG and then put it into a fast-paced 15-hour game. Now, you're going to think I'm crazy for this next one, but I'll put Origami King here. I think this game completely nails the exploration elements and pacing of an adventure game. 5, I think I can put The Thousand Year Door here. 6, Superstar Saga. It's a good start to the series, but Bowser's Inside Story is just better. 7, Super Paper Mario, but this is still a fun game. So none of these games are bad at all, but something's got to be at the bottom. Feel free to put all the other games I haven't played below this. So would I recommend The Thousand Year Door? Sure, it's a very solid RPG adventure that will eat up a few dozen hours of your time. I'm not a Thousand Year Door acolyte, but it is a good game. It's probably the best entry point into the series in terms of understanding why people love Paper Mario, even though I do like 64 better, and it's on NSO for quote-unquote free. Now, if you've never played a Mario RPG, and you're asking me, should I get Super Mario RPG or Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door, I would honestly lean towards Super Mario RPG, despite it being more of a typical RPG with a Mario skin, as opposed to Paper Mario, which is really its own thing. Honestly, you won't beat yourself up if you eventually play both. Though, as we will see in the news section, a new Mario RPG challenger has appeared. Now, my ranking is going to get very, very confusing in a few months. Okay, well, that's it for games, so now for some news. We got our first big boy Nintendo Direct of the year. And man, it was a fantastic one. I was skeptical. I assumed Nintendo would just coast on ports and remasters until Switch 2 came out, but they are really pushing for another big holiday. Maybe the last one where there is only one Switch on the market. First game was one of the more surprising ones, Mario and Luigi Brothership. So yes, a third Mario RPG in a 1-year span. I'm not complaining, but it is odd. It does feel like Nintendo is pitting them all against each other, and we'll see which one is victorious in battle, and which one they should focus on in the future. The answer though, all three. Make a new Super Mario RPG, make a new Paper Mario, and make a new Mario and Luigi, which they are doing. Alpha Dream is gone, but there have been some investigations, and some are saying that perhaps Ilka of BDSP fame is working on this game. They got a lot of flack for BDSP, but I do feel like you can't pin all the game's faults on Ilka. Also, I do really like that game. I'm probably the biggest BDSP fan in the world by default. And Ilka is really more of a for-hire type of company. They really handle the coding element of the game, not really the planning or the game design. Recently, they worked on Sandland, and I have to think that Namco producers were more hands-on with that game than Ilka in terms of game design. But Brothership looks like classic Mario and Luigi gameplay. Mario is A, Luigi is B. You do some overworld puzzles and have RPG battles. The art style looks incredible. It really does look like the illustrations come to life. It still has a top-down, fixed camera view though, so not too dissimilar from the past games. The story seems to revolve around the bros traveling by ship to some islands and then fighting electrical enemies. Sure, I guess that concept could be a game. Why not? If you've never played Mario and Luigi and wonder why you should care about yet another Mario RPG, it's because the game really does feel like a successor to the Paper Mario RPG series. It has timed attacks, unique combos between the brothers, and tons of weird enemies you've never seen before in a Mario game, plus a very funny and goofy story. This is the first time it's ever been on a console, so it does feel like a big coming out party for the series. It's coming out November 7th, so Nintendo is really pushing this as one of their big holiday games, so I expect it to be pretty ambitious. Next was Nintendo World Championships, and originally I wasn't so excited for this game, but some previews have come out, and they make it seem like it's much better than what you would expect, so I might have to put it on my radar. Next, Fairy Tail 2, Don't Care, Fantasian, Do Care. This game is finally free from the buttonless clutches of Apple Arcade. It doesn't look like they did a whole lot to the visuals. It still looks very much like a mobile game, but I'm glad I can finally try this game out. The far bigger announcement though, Nintendo Switch Sports is getting basketball this summer. This was a very surprising announcement since the game hasn't been updated in a notable way in over a year. Golf was 18 months ago. Data miners did reveal that there's code for basketball and dodgeball in the game, so it does make you wonder if we are only a few months away from dodgeball. The basketball mode doesn't look too dissimilar from Wii Sports Resort, but now you can play online. I'm excited for this update and I'll definitely try it out. And I always love reminding people of this. Nintendo Switch Sports has sold over 13 million copies. So yes, people do like this game, people are buying it, and that's why Nintendo is updating it. Next was Mio, a beautiful looking 2D platformer, and I guess I gotta put that on my radar as well. We got Disney Illusion Island and Hello Kitty Island Adventure, so Island fans, you were really eating good this direct. Looney Tunes Wacky World of Sports, Don't Care, Among Us Update, neat. Farmagia, which is, I guess, a farming game, and also some sort of maybe Pikmin-esque RPG. You literally grow monsters like they are tomatoes, and then you send them out to fight bigger monsters. It's a pretty interesting premise, at least. I have not really gotten into any farm game, but honestly, I haven't given any a real try. Should I just get Stardew Valley? All these games are riding on that game's coattails, right? But now we're back to Nintendo games with Donkey Kong Country Returns HD, a remaster of the original game. This is very unexpected. I think many assumed or hoped a new DK game would be coming out to line up with the park opening, but we are instead getting an enhanced port. It's being handled by Forever Entertainment, which I know from their Panzer Dragoon remake. They've handled a lot of ports and remasters, so I think they are a pretty capable team. It is good to see Nintendo bringing a lot more companies under their wing when it comes to handling these first-party franchises, and it really helps keep the software momentum flowing. The game seems to lack Funky Kong, but it will have all the 3DS levels, so it is going to be like the ultimate version of the game. I gotta admit, I'm not a big fan of this game. It is surprisingly difficult and pretty frustrating, but I'm not a big DK platformer guy in general, so take my opinion with a grain of salt. For DK hardcores out there, I think they will be happy that this game is back again. It's coming out in 2025, so it will keep Pokemon Legends ZA company. That was followed up by the return of Dragon Quest III HD 2D coming November 14th. The game looks far more detailed and visually rich than its original showing. I think it's safe to say that this is easily the most impressive looking HD 2D game yet. And it has competition with Octopath 2 and Triangle Strategy, which are amazing looking games. It doesn't seem like a straight remake either. There are definitely some changes and additions. I think Square set out to make the ultimate DQ3 experience, and not just the original game with prettier graphics. For one, there's at least one new class, and the special edition shows art of a monster master class. More classes is probably my most wanted feature for the remakes, so I'm glad we have at least one. The game in general is a strange beast because you've got the original, the SNES remake, then a GBC remake which has a lot of exclusive content, then a mobile remake, and is this game just going to take all the additional content from those games and shove it into this one? Or kind of start from square one and just add in completely new ideas? We don't have a full changelog yet, and the game is still 5 months away, so there's plenty of time to see what's new, but I'm absolutely picking this up. Is it smart to play both this and Mario and Luigi at the same time? We will see. Funko Fusion, Don't Care, Luigi's Mansion 2 HD, A fine game, but I still have my 3DS, so I don't feel the urge to pick it up on the Switch. Maybe one day on sale, we'll see. The new Denpa from Genius Sorority was next. I talked about this game earlier this year because it did show up on the Japanese Partner Direct, but now it's confirmed for a Western release. This is the latest entry in the Denpa series, which started on the 3DS. I think I said last time that this may be an enhanced port of the mobile game, which was called New Denpa, but it actually might be a totally new game called The New Denpa. Denpa heads, please help me out here. But it's free to play, so I wonder what the monetization is like. Next, Metal Slug Attack Reloaded, which is kind of a tower defense game. Then Darkest Dungeon 2, a game I kind of want to check out. And we got our big NSO update, Link to the Past with 4 Swords and Metroid Zero Mission on GBA. This was actually how I played Link to the Past the first time. And it's also how I played the first Metroid game for the first time as well. It's really hard for me to go back to the original NES Metroid, but Zero Mission is a great remake, so check it out. N64 also got the mature 17 Plus app, which was already in Japan, with Turok and Perfect Dark hitting NSO. Perfect Dark, obviously an N64 classic, but like GoldenEye, I got most of the fun out of the multiplayer. Perfect Dark does have an advanced bot system, so maybe I should try it out. Next, a genuine Megaton announcement for me, Phantom Brave: The Lost Hero, a sequel to 2004's original strategy RPG from Nippon Ichi. Who thought a new Phantom Brave was coming out? While it's been ported to PSP, Wii, Steam, and even Switch, I don't think anyone expected them to revisit the series. The first game is legitimately one of the best strategy RPGs ever, and one of my personal favorite games of all time. If you've never played it, it's a strategy RPG, but it's filled with one-of-a-kind ideas that I haven't seen in any game since. It's completely gridless, so you move within a movement radius. You can get incredibly precise with your movement as well, every inch counts. You also summon units to the battlefield via items, which affect their stats. This is called the confined system. So you have to think about who you want to summon where, and when you want to summon them because they have limited turns once they are on a battlefield. It also has an insanely deep level of customization, where you can fuse items into weapons, weapons into characters, characters into items, and so forth. You can also give titles that further affect stats. You can manipulate randomly generated dungeons. I could really spend a whole podcast just talking about how great the original is. I did appear on Superpod Saga last year, where I talked about this game quite a bit, so go check out that episode. But point is, I'm thrilled the franchise is back. As for what's new, they didn't give out a whole lot of info, but we can see that yes, the gridless system is back along with the confined system where you summon the characters. But this time, it seems like you can summon them into kind of like mechs, or the items turn into some machine or weapon once the character is summoned into them. This is somewhat similar to Makai Kingdom, where characters can use vehicles and buildings on the map. Morona can also fuse into other characters, which, I guess, okay, I'm sure that will have major implications on the gameplay, but I'm not sure why you would want to fuse into Morona. It's coming out 2025, so yes, Game of the Year 2025 may already be locked. Next up, another shocking announcement, Marvel vs. Capcom Fighting Collection. The 6 first original Marvel fighting games from Capcom are bundled in with the Punisher arcade game. This is something I've wanted for a long time, but never imagined it was possible. I was just thinking how silly it was that there's no Marvel fighting game on the Switch when X-Men 97 was airing. But I didn't know what Capcom was cooking. Obviously, the crown jewel is Marvel vs. Capcom 2, one of the best fighting games ever. And soon you can play it on your Switch portably. Insane. This is the game in the collection I've spent the most time with, but I'm curious to try out the older games as well, since I've barely touched them. But I imagine most are solely going to buy it for MVC2, which I don't blame them. These are the arcade versions, so they are faithful to that, but there are some changes that include new characters that were never playable in the arcades. Norimaro, a guest character based on a Japanese comedian, is removed from Marvel vs. Street Fighter, but he is replaced by Cyber Akuma, who is, let's be honest, way cooler. There's also rollback netcode for online matches, a training room, gallery, sound test, and so on. It's basically everything you could ever want from a collection like this. It's coming this year, and it's going to be a day one purchase for me. And hey, does this open the door for a Capcom vs. SNK collection? Please, just give me CVS 2, that's all I want. Mario Party is back with Super Mario Party Jamboree. The big new addition is the Koopathlon, an online 20-player mode where you race around the map. This mode looks pretty crazy, and honestly, it is intriguing. I'm not a Mario Party hater, but I don't have 3 people in my life who want to just constantly come over and play Mario Party. But I do wonder if I can have a lot of fun with this online mode. It's coming out in October and will sell 10+ million copies. After that, the game of the show dropped, The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, a brand new 2D Zelda game starring Zelda and probably made by Grezzo. Wow, is all I have to say. Who on earth imagined we will get a new Zelda adventure 16 months after Tears of the Kingdom? And one this ambitious, I still can't believe it's real. Link, Ganon, they fell into a hole. What's the girl do except take things into her own hands? The core mechanic is that Zelda can make echoes or copies of items that she comes across. Find a table, copy a table. You can also copy enemies that fight for you, or you can use them in other ways to solve puzzles. The mechanic isn't too dissimilar from auto build in Tears of the Kingdom, but it feels unique in the sense that being able to copy anything you come across and use them in multiple ways. In the trailer, we see Zelda stacking up tables to reach a higher position, using beds like a bridge, summoning enemies to fight other enemies on the field. My mind is racing about all the possibilities. It feels far more freeform and open than any other 2D Zelda when it comes to traversal and puzzle solving. For example, there's a ledge with strong wind blowing. On one section, Zelda echoes a box and then jumps over the wind. The next, she blocks the wind with a shrub. So how you deal with this one puzzle may be completely different from person to person. I'm really excited to see what items you can copy and the unique ways people tackle puzzles. It does feel like a very Breath of the Wild inspired design philosophy. We really have moved far beyond the old lock and key method of solving things in Zelda. Some things I want to know, there does seem to be something similar to the chemistry system in the 3D Zeldas. We see Zelda burn grass, something we haven't really done to that extent in a 2D Zelda game. Yes, I know you can burn a bush with a lamp in Zelda 1, this is different. It makes me wonder if elements reacting with each other will play a key role in the game. We also see water blocks, which makes me wonder, can we freeze these blocks or electrify them? Being able to manipulate copied items into new ones would be a very interesting mechanic. Speaking of mechanics, we have some sort of idea about how the copying feature will work. It does seem like each item has a cost, so you won't be able to summon 10,000 beds and make the game crash. Your little fairy Tri has some triangles floating behind it, and in the item menu, we can see items cost a certain number of triangles. So for example, if Tri has 4 triangles, you can only summon 4 1-triangle items, or 2 2-triangle items, and so on. Perhaps we will be able to upgrade Tri, but I imagine the devs do want to put a hard limit on just how many things you can have in the overworld. As for the story, it does seem like it takes place in the Link to the Past, aka Downfall timeline. The world is similar to Link to the Past in its layout, but it has a lot of new areas like Death Mountain and the Deku Tree, Gerudo Town, a tropical area, and so on. So it doesn't seem like they were just using the exact same map. I am excited to see these more modern Zelda characters and features appear in what's essentially the Link to the Past world. We even see the old school Zora and the new school Zoras right next to each other in a shot, which leads me into what I think the story might be about. Okay, spoilers for the Downfall timeline. Link to the Past, you beat Ganon, and he goes bye-bye. Awakening, no Ganon. The Oracle games, Twin Rova revives Ganon, but then it's really just his body and not his mind. Ganon then gets the Triforce of Power somehow, don't ask why. Link Between Worlds, again, trying to revive Ganon, but it doesn't really work and only his body appears. Triforce Heroes, no Ganon. Then Zelda 1 with a fully revived Ganon, then 2 with no Ganon. But we see Ganon in the Echoes trailer, so where is this game? I mean, really, it could be anywhere, but if I had to guess, it would either be between Triforce Heroes and Zelda 1, or maybe even after Zelda 2, which would make it the last game in the Downfall timeline before Breath of the Wild. Though maybe they were just being cheeky about this game and it actually takes place after Link's Awakening and before the Oracle games, where Link is actually the same character as the Link from Link's Awakening, which accounts for the art style. But why are there so many landmarks that weren't in Link to the Past? This makes me think it might be the last game in the Downfall timeline, since it takes place in more expanded Hyrule. Though I also wonder if we were getting some sort of multiverse angle, since we see the multiple Zoras. The rifts could be dimensional rifts that open up other timelines or alternate versions of Hyrule, which might explain why Ganon is back again. I can also see those rifts on the world map being somewhat similar to shrines, kind of unique challenges. Again, Nintendo could just do anything they want and completely contradict everything. They don't care. I'm just excited about the gameplay mechanics and not its place in the timeline. But Echoes is easily my most anticipated game of this year and a frontrunner for possible game of the year if they pull it off. After Zelda was a bunch of games I don't care about, but it is funny to see Aloy in a Nintendo Direct, and it's cool that Ace Attorney fans are getting the last untranslated game from the franchise finally. Oh, and Romancing Saga 2 is getting a remake, which is pretty crazy. This is sort of the Dragon Quest III of the Saga franchise, and that is an early entry that sold a lot and established many conventions from the franchise going forward. I'll keep my eye on it, but Nintendo's big announcement they saved for the very end, Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. After 7 years, it has finally returned, and it looks like Metroid Prime. You shoot, you scan, you roll. No real megatons in terms of gameplay conventions here. This trailer was very much a, hey, Metroid Prime is back type of announcement. The visuals do look spectacular, and I can't wait to see what Retro does with the Switch hardware. And yes, our boy Silex finally returned after being teased for so long. What is he cooking up? Does he know that he will be defeated and then never mentioned again in a Metroid game ever? I'm not a huge Metroid Prime fan. I like the first game, but never felt like I needed to play the sequels. But 4, hey, it's been so long that I'm very curious to see how this game will play in 2025. People praise the Prime 1 remaster, and I think it will be very similar in a lot of ways. So that was the Nintendo Direct, a lot of must-play games, and the Switch is full steam ahead for the rest of 2024 and a bit of 2025 as well. Some other news tidbits: Limited Run Games had a showcase. They're bringing back Fear Effect, which I never expected to see again. Also the Gex trilogy, a Bubsy collection, and the biggest announcement for me, Tuba 2 is also coming along with the first game. With Marvel coming back and now collections of Gex and Bubsy, it really does feel like any old game could re-release at any time. Unless it's a Sega game, and then it will remain in the void forever. Some Japan news: Shibuya Park will have an exhibit for merch based on the King of Games starting in July, showcasing a lot of their video game t-shirts. I'll check it out and report back. Baskin-Robbins in Japan also has another Mario collaboration, this time with a Wonder Flower ice cream float, which, again, I want to try out. Also, Nintendo Tokyo got new Luigi's Mansion themed merch, including a fun glow-in-the-dark t-shirt. Please don't wear this in a movie theater. And last bit of news, Ampharos was assigned the ambassador Pokemon for Nagasaki Prefecture. Nagasaki is famous for its port and coastal region, so yeah, you need a lighthouse Pokemon. There will also be 5 new Poke Lids placed in Nagasaki Prefecture, so if you're trying to visit all of them, get ready to make a trip to Nagasaki soon. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks as always for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast on your favorite app. Leave a 5-star review as well, it really helps with visibility. This podcast is also available on YouTube, so like and subscribe there as well. I'm on Twitter, Threads, Blue Sky, Instagram. Just search for tokyogamelife or find the links in the podcast description. If you like the podcast, be sure to share it with your friends and on social media. If there's anything you want me to talk about or cover, don't be shy, just message me on Twitter. The next episode will be on July 14th. See you next time. Matane!